Hello and welcome to History Bubble, the Great Divergence Part 3. In the second episode, exploring cunts, germs and steel. This episode will cover the second half of the book, while the next episode in this sub-series will explore the many criticisms of this book. The last episode mainly explored the domestication of plants and its impact on the world, and now we'll instead explore the other type of domesticatable species, animals. There are many factors determining the possibility of domesticating an animal species, and they are much more restricting than that of plants.
A high risk in domesticating is countered by the possible rewards, with animals being able to provide meat, clothes, military plows, and possibly germs from big domesticated mammals. Birds and small mammals have also been domesticated to a decent but lessened degree of usefulness. The reasons are, quote, many of these small animals thus yielded food, clothing, or warmth, but none of them pulled plows or wagons, none of them bore riders, none except dogs pulled sleds or became war machines, and none of them have been as important for food as are big domesticated mammals. Hence, the rest of this chapter will confine itself to big mammals. Diamond defines big mammals as species weighing over 45 kilograms, and there are only 14 such species domesticated, of which 9 are only important in very specific regions of the world. The minor 9, as he calls them, are the Arabian camel, Bactrian camel, llama/alpaca, distinct breeds of the same ancestral species, donkey, reindeer, water buffalo, yak, bountig, and the cow, with the 5 major ones existing across all the world being pig, sheep, goat, horse, and cow. While emissions seem to exist, such as elephants, these were only tamed, not domesticated. For true domestication to exist, the species has to have notable differences from the wild counterparts and have their offspring also be domesticated. Some, such as sheep and cows, became smaller, while smaller creatures became larger, with wool and milk production also increasing. All but one of the big 14 was confined to Eurasia and North Africa, with a notable exception. One explanation for this is that Eurasia had the most herbivorous or omnivorous megafauna at 72, with Africa at 51, America at 24, but formally the same as Africa, and Australia with only 1. Eurasia and North Africa domesticated 18% of the species, America 4%, and the rest domesticated none. This is a huge disparity and leads us to question on why Eurasia domesticated almost 5 times as high a percentage of the existing large mammals on the continent than on any other.
Once again, the cultural explanation might be tried, but it once again fails, since almost all societies easily domesticated animals from other societies are shown to tame many species. They domesticate them once they were there, and thousands of different tribes over thousands of different years with different cultures all domesticated big mammals that were domesticated by the 2500 BC, indicating that the pool was already depleted. There is also evidence that some of the species that were domesticated have been domesticated several times in different regions. Even with all of our modern knowledge of biology, we have only barely domesticated any more species, even with several major scientific attempts to do so.
With the eland elk, moose, zebra, muskox, and American bison, all of which fail. All this indicates that the reason some species were not domesticated mostly lies in the hands of animals, not the humans. So what are the traits of domesticatable animals? Firstly, raising them must be profitable, ruling out carnivores and animals with any strict diet at cost of keeping these would outweigh the benefit. The closest an exception is the dog, which was rarely bred for meat, and wherever he was, the dogs had to live on a mostly herbivorous diet. The growth time can be another problem, as if a species takes too long to reach adulthood, it's often much easier and profitable to either tame them or hunt them, depending on your needs. Other animals are also incredibly hard to have reproduce in captivity, and some species, such as a cheetah, has been tried for domestication for thousands of years, only ever being bred in captivity by the 60s. Other species are too aggressive to be domesticated, as humans would have too much of a hard time controlling them, such as bears, buffaloes, and hippos. Some are also too athletic and skittish to be domesticated, such as many forms of deer that cannot be kept under control when captured, either jumping over fences or killing their prey, trying to get loose of a rope. The last problem comes with animals' social structure, with solitary species being unable to accept humans as their leaders. The same is the case for animals without strict hierarchies, which will not follow the commands of a specific individual. One last type of social structure are species such as antelope, which has a good social structure for most of the year, but when mating season comes, they become less hierarchical and more territorial. Almost all of the 14 domesticatable large species have all of the favorable traits, making them perfect for domestication, and most good species just happen to be located on the Eurasian continent. Another factor is the ease of spreading, or diffusion. This means the time for technology and domesticated species to spread. Do this by example of the Eurasian food spreading with an average of 1.1 kilometers a year in its other stages, while in Mexico and the US is only 0.8, and between the Andes and Ecuador only 0.3. Another way to check the spread of diffusion is to check how many times a species has been domesticated, as if it's only been domesticated once, it indicates quick diffusion, since it had not been domesticated in other regions and had spread there before that could happen. The reason that east to west diffusion is way quicker than north to south because of the similar climate, leading to especially plants and animals spreading quicker, as they have a hard time surviving in different climates, needing time to adapt. This made domestication diffusion easier in the long Eurasia rather than tall America. One factor which has both advantage and disadvantage Eurasia are plagues and pandemics, which existed much more in the old world than the new. One reason for this is population density, since disease spread easier in close quarter. The larger population also obviously had an impact. The last and most unnoticeable major factors are animals and the evolution of microbes, which have to be explored to understand why. Like any other species, microevolution is based on spreading, which they do when they infect other organisms. There are different ways for the microbe to achieve this goal. The first is to just do nothing and wait for the former host to be eaten, such as salmonella. Others hitchhike with other animals, such as flies and mosquitoes, to new hosts, while others still spread to fetuses, infecting babies. Others still take medicine to their own hands, changing the host to spread, such as creating rashes, spreading by touch, or such with the common cold, promoting the last host to sneeze or have diarrhea. For the microbe to achieve its goal, the host needs to survive, which results in most diseases not being deadly to the primary target. Exceptions are microbes that spread to carcasses and which has the strategy to make their host incredibly infectious, which might kill them in the process. But if there are more than one new host, the creature can still spread. For disease to be called an epidemic, they have to meet 3 criteria. They spread quickly, develop quickly, and either die or recover completely, rendering the microbe useless in the area for at least some decades after the epidemic. This means epidemic could only be effective in relatively centralized societies, since they needed to spread even after they had infected the initial group. Another way for the diseases to be created is when the microbe switches hosts, because the new host is radically different in their internal structure and organs, which often means the microbe might kill them, and if they spread, an epidemic might be created. The reason for this not happening all the time is that microbe changing host species is incredibly rare. If we compare Eurasia to any other continent, it is easy to see how the incredibly tight population with a huge amount of domesticated animals and low hygiene have much higher chance of developing epidemic than a less dense population in most areas. In the Americas, with barely any domesticatable animals, even with the 5 major domesticated animals in the New World, the alpaca, dog, guinea pig, muscovy duck, and turkey, which did not live as close or as densely with the humans, leading to an even lesser chance of spreading diseases cross species.
These are likely the reason why the European epidemic and diseases to which they had been immune ravaged the American continent, while the same is not true for the opposite. It's not to say that Americas had no epidemic or dangerous diseases, only that Eurasia had a lot more, and that Americas had a harder time spreading.
Another factor leading to the success of the nation is writing, which is almost a prerequisite to heavily centralized societies. It turns out writing is incredibly hard to develop, as it is likely to have often been created only 4 times in history, in Mesopotamia, Mexico, China, and Egypt, with the last 2 not even being certain. The reason for this is that writing required advanced societies with dedicated scribes that can survive for thousands of years. The difficulty inherent to writing means it is heavily reliant on diffusion.
writing is only one of thousands of technologies which help societies to prosper. One explanation how technology throughout great invention. The problem with this theory is that there requires great precision in if a specific technology is useful, since most tech require other tech or specific societal need to be useful and adopted. The view that great people produced most tech is also flawed, since most tech needs an incredible amount of people to become useful, and is in an investor's interest to discredit all the previous inventors of a similar technology, especially since patent needed to show a new idea, and they wanted more sales than their competitors.
Therefore, these people are not needed to be born for technology to be gained at such time. At worst, it will be prolonged by a few decades. The first step to invent the technology and find a use for it, and then people will accept the new tech. There are many examples of slight or decent improvements which often do not get accepted, when already invented tech might almost work just as well to keep the status quo. 14 different aspects have been proposed by technology historians for the success of creating new technologies: life expectancy, high wages, patent education, promising rewards for new tech, individual rewards, risk-taking, scientific outlook, tolerance, and religion. These factors can be proposed, but it does not answer the question on why these things are different in different regions. War can be both good or bad for tech. Centralized government can also be both good and bad, the same being true for hard environments to survive in, and resources.
But when you claim the culture is the main drive for tech, and there was a recent example of Australia or Africa was underdeveloped, there is no thorough analysis between societies of similar tech level on different continents, so there is no evidence to prove this. Other problems include that most tech are not invented in societies, but adopted from others, and that societies and cultures change rapidly and are often not unanimous within a region.
One invention that is very hard to create, which do not seem as such, is the wheel, which has only been invented twice, most likely, once in the New World and once in the Old. The reason for thinking that it has only been invented once is that the Old World wheels have the same design, which does not exist in the New, and there are many different easy designs for wheel. There are many such examples of seemingly uncomplex text only being created a few times, showing that diffusion is the most important factor in tech development. Inventions may spread in different ways of trade, immigration, war, espionage are just a few examples.
Some might also be independently invented after receiving tech without knowing how it was created. This diffusion means that isolated but also have much less tech. Some tech might even be discarded. Tech is mostly useful in societies with much competition or that have more powerful neighbors. Tech might also need other tech to be useful or easy enough to produce. For example, a printing press need a good alphabet, necessary book production, metals and other things to be useful. The next chapter will focus on societal development, on the examples of Australia, New Guinea, America and Africa, and mostly retread old ground and exemplifying former arguments in the context of these regions.
So, in conclusion, the first and most important thing for development is food production, which is a prerequisite for society. The most determining factor is the amount of domesticatable species. There are also diffusion and population size. The argument is often called environmental determinism as a derogatory, for example, accusing it of ruling out humans, although this argument does not, and Diamond believes human inventiveness is needed. He also believes that history should be considered a science, and that his numbers and stats for food production constitute as such.
The epilogue of this book tries to answer the question, then why Europe instead of Eurasia? For most of history, Europe was one of the most backward places of Eurasia and almost got all their tech from other parts of the continent. There are a lot of more proximate causes, but Diamond believes that the real causes are in the environment. The reason for
the Fertile Crescent's failure is that, beyond its good fauna giving it a head start, it had no further advantages and could only sustain a relatively low population density out of the main fertile regions. A lot of it is in fertile desert. It was once the agricultural capital of the world, and the region was probably once much greener, but it had a fragile ecosystem, and the area was overworked, with rainfall being low. The ecosystem of Europe was both stronger and had a shorter time to be overworked. He believes the reason for China's failure is their unity, thus preventing inventions and, for example, the ship journeys to Americas.
European countries to entertain these ideas, even if they failed many times, because a nation might take the idea up that was not the original one. China's case makes it so that the failure of one leader would prevent things from happening. The reason for this is that
Europe has a lot more peninsulas, big islands and other things separating areas, making it hard to unify, unlike the quite connected China. So China initially had advantage, but the same advantage then became a disadvantage.
He still feels geography plays a large part today in which countries rise, because they both need a good start and good geographic placement to do well. Historical science are concerned with proximate and ultimate causes for things. There are many counter-arguments to Diamond's idea of historical science, such that the idea that societies are too complex for science. He compares these difficulties with astronomy, climatologists, ecologists, evolutionary biologists, geologists, paleontologists, and others, which are respected sciences with similar complex structure. There are many more counter-arguments against Diamond, and much more of these ideas will be expressed in the episode following this one. And most things in this episode can be likely to be wrong and are discredited by a lot of historians. And all of this will be discussed in the next episode of History Bubble. Hope to see you then.